When I was a balding little boy, video games felt like my whole life. Sure, I had school just like any other child, but my mind was consumed with the desire to return home and continue playing my favorite games, which would be cut short by the inevitability of my mother telling me that it was time to go to bed. As I grew into my teens, so too did my obsession and the complexities that came with the evolving gaming ecosystem of the 2000s. I would bounce between RPGs and real-time strategy games and platformers and shooters as the mood struck me, combing through the libraries of Blockbuster and, soon too, the internet in hopes of finding the next greatest world to explore. The obsession continued through my college years and my 20s, but eventually the responsibility of life had started to cut into my hobby until finally, in my 30s, the ever-present weight of the world's problems and my personal responsibilities and relationships squeezed my free time into a void from which it seems impossible to retrieve. The obsession never went away, but my ability to indulge it has greatly receded as a deluge of more and more important things flood in and take root. It's a sort of tragedy of becoming an adult, and when paired with the increasing cynicism of a matured gaming industry that seems hell-bent on creating the safest and most milquetoast way to garner an audience on top of the bipartisan awareness that the world is burning down around us, it can be hard to find the time and energy to get lost in a world the same way that I did as a child. It's one of the most first-world problems that I can imagine, but hobbies are fun, and not being able to engage with those hobbies the same way you used to is kind of a bummer. That's why, when the rare game comes along and draws me into a vortex of a newfound obsession to the point where an entire day can vanish into the ether until it's 5:30 in the morning with responsibilities to tackle the next day, it's a bit of a personal event. When a single-player game burrows its way so deep into my brain that it's difficult to get back to a productive state of mind because it's a challenge to stop thinking or reading about it. These games are rare personal masterpieces and will be different for everyone. But for me, at least for my YouTube career, these games are like The Witness, Hollow Knight, Environmental Station Alpha, Tunic, and Elden Ring. But more recently, that game is Animal Well. Animal Well is a metroidvania. Haha, big surprise, the metroidvania guy likes a metroidvania, but it's not really that simple. It's no surprise that Hollow Knight left an incredible mark on the gaming landscape, and even though the metroidvania genre was already entering its renaissance by the time that game released, Hollow Knight's success catapulted the subgenre into the relative mainstream, all but guaranteeing that we would see a heavy saturation of it for the foreseeable future. And as much as I do love these games, the popularity of them means that, very quickly, tropes begin to emerge. Just like with BioShock, where there's always a lighthouse, there's always a man, and there's always a city, with Metroidvanias it seems like there's always a wall jump, there's always a dash, and there's always a double jump. I don't mean to clown on Metroidvania tropes too hard, because they're tropes for a reason. They're almost always fun to unlock and play with, but with each new game that employs the same common mechanics, they can start to lose their luster. And that's the first part where Animal Well shines. And because of that, I'm going to be showing very little footage from this game, and will probably just use footage from the first half hour or so, because I believe that a game like this deserves to be tackled as blindly as possible, knowing as little as possible before going in, because it's just that fresh. Discovery of game mechanics can be as much of a spoiler target as the story, and that extends to the game's world, the game's items, and the movement mechanics that you accrue over the course of the game. Anyway, I want to reiterate that I'm not against the use of common tropes in games. Just like The Last of Us can do a zombie setting in a way that works well, so too can a Metroidvania that reuses the same tired tropes. It's all about the execution and the context. That's why Hollow Knight excels. It's also worth noting that I'm a bit against the idea of innovation just for the sake of it. Making something new and unpredictable doesn't automatically make it good, and I find it horribly frustrating when I read a comment somewhere about a game or a story where their main complaint is just that it's too predictable. I say, who cares if it's predictable if it's still engaging? That said, innovation done well can truly be a great experience, and Animal Well does this so, well. The first ability that I got, and that most players will probably receive, is the Bubble Wand, which in its own way can be used as a bit of a double jump to provide some sorely needed extra vertical mobility. This, of course, unlocks a lot of destinations like any good Metroidvania does, and accomplishes what those other games do with the tried and true double jump, but in a more unique way. Granted, the Bubble Wand itself isn't wholly unique because Always Awakening came out in 2017 and uses a bubble wand in much the same way. And if you really want to stretch for the first sighting of this tech, you'd have to go even further back to 1986's Bubble Bobble. But that's one really obscure Metroidvania and one really old arcade game for this first movement ability, so I'm still comfortable calling this one relatively original. And nearly every single usable item that you collect in this game is similarly unique. On top of that, most items have multiple different uses, some that you may only discover by accident in a way that makes you say out loud to yourself, "Holy crap, was that always possible?" And recontextualizing the way that you look at your map and the terrain in front of you. And the best part about this is that the interaction doesn't at all seem surprising once the initial shock of possibility subsides. It just makes sense. Of course it works that way. Why shouldn't it? And because I respect you and want you to discover these things on your own, I won't share those surprises with you, because they're a part of the delight of playing Animal Well, and that's where Animal Well's second big strength lies. In an industry that seems deathly afraid of creating something that any subset of players might not experience, and where over-tutorialization rules the first few hours of most games' playtime, a video game that respects your intelligence is always nice to see. To be fair, tutorialization is a hard problem to solve, and can be especially valuable for players who haven't been gaming for their whole lives and aren't as fluent with the controller as we might be. But most things can be communicated through either map and world design, or otherwise just allowing the player to experiment. It's one of the reasons that I hold Super Metroid in such high regard. The Shine Spark and Wall Jump are brilliant movement abilities in that game with their implementations, but because they're purely optional, a player might get through the entirety of that game without even discovering that they exist. But once you do discover that they exist, the options explode. The game opens up, and your mastery over this world grows, all because you happen to experiment, figure out some movement techniques, and learn how to use them. This kind of organic discovery feels better than just about anything in gaming, in my opinion. It goes deeper than simply the controls and movement though, because unlike most other Metroidvania games, this one doesn't focus on combat. That's not to say that there isn't danger lurking in this world, because there definitely is, and it doesn't take very long for you to realize that you're not exactly at the top of the food chain in Animal Well. Instead, your main focus is to explore and find your way to the 4 flames marked on the map, making your way through dangerous creatures and devious puzzles on your way. And when I say puzzles, if that scares you, then don't worry too much, because the puzzles are less like The Witness and more like Celeste. Puzzle platforming, where you use your tools in different and clever ways to get around. And it never really asks too much of you. That is, if all you want to do is simply beat the game. To once again use Hollow Knight as an example, because it's a pretty incredible game and does something very similar, it's well known by now that the game continues past the earliest point of you being able to reach the credits. As long as you continue exploring, you'll eventually find the tools to get a better, harder ending. Not a lot is asked of you except to continue playing. Environmental Station Alpha does something similar as well, but instead of simply giving you the keys to the kingdom as a result of continuing to play, ESA asks you to hunt the world for clues about how to proceed, what to do, and how to eventually win. There's a layer of complex puzzle solving that requires keen observation and figuring out a way to translate a language spoken by the game's creatures, and the amount that this sucked me into the game's world and allowed me to connect with it is a special feeling of immersion that cannot be understated. Too many games simply treat their worlds as a simple vessel for a game's story and its gameplay, and far too few find such an effective way to suck you into it the way these world-spanning puzzles can. So, in that vein, Animal Well is the gift that keeps on giving. Seeing the end of the game here doesn't actually mean you've seen the end of the game. When I first saw the credits, it was just after about 5 hours of play. But in some ways, the game only truly begins here. For all intents and purposes, this is considered beating the game because the credits roll, but there's still so much left of the game to uncover, discover, and collect. This is where the game really starts opening up its secrets to you, and as you continue to explore and collect, you begin to master this game's world and movement in unexpected ways. And then you start to notice more and more little oddities that require just a little bit of further thought, until you realize that it's 5:30 in the morning and you've got other things to do. So, even though the game seems short at the surface, I still have over 20 hours logged on my one and only save file, with dozens more just hanging out in the game's Discord and theorizing about the developer's machinations. The puzzles can get pretty dastardly in Animal Well. I'll always encourage you to be patient and try to solve things on your own, because even if you think you're bad at puzzles, you might surprise yourself and have a good time of it. But the deeper you get into this game's world, the harder these puzzles get, and the more you're going to have to lean on the collective knowledge of the community who have figured out some things that you'd probably never even notice in a million years. If you're not that great with puzzles though, and would rather stop before it gets too hard, I'd still say Animal Well's first layer is still worth the price of entry for its setting and its originality alone. Even if I stopped playing after my first 5 hours, I'd still have considered the game to be one of the best Metroidvania experiences that I've had in years. Everything about it just feels right. But the fact that I found myself so invested in this world that I wanted to dump extra dozens of hours on completion and speculation is what sends it over the edge. And not that this is important or anything, but all this game was made to fit in a paltry 33 megabytes of disk space. Doesn't impact the game at all, but it just goes to show that this developer, whoever he is pretty dang smart and knows what he's doing. And who is that developer, you might ask? Well, this is the perfect time to address the donkey in the room, because Animal Well is published by Big Mode, a publishing company run by none other than Video Game Donkey. In fact, it's the first game under their name, and Donkey has not been shy about pushing his company and his partners in his videos. And all that's great, but Donkey didn't make this game. Billy Basso did, after 7 years of working on it pretty much by himself.
I made that one.
I see a lot of talk about Animal Well and how it relates to Donkey, and because of the size of his audience and his marketing strategy and the nature of how humans tend to talk about things, I see people calling it the Donkey game. That does a disservice to Billy, Donkey, and every future game Big Mode publishes, and I would love to see this not become a trend or a habit among Donkey fans and just people in general. Donkey himself may be responsible for practically guaranteeing this game's success through his own popularity, but Billy is the reason that this game is even any good in the first place. This game is Billy's vision, Billy's ideas, for the most part, and Billy's execution. I'm sure Big Mode has been invaluable to Billy, but this is a Billy Basso original, not a Donkey one. I just wanted to get that out there because, honestly, Billy deserves all the credit in the world for making such a captivating game. It may not really look like much at a glance, but Animal Well is an achievement, mechanically, creatively, and even technically, with all of this fitting in just about 33 megabytes, if you needed reminding. It's been an absolute blast being a part of this game's release and watching people in Discord with more time on their hands than me slowly uncovering the well of mysteries that lie beneath the surface of this incredible game. Maybe it's my copium talking, but I believe there's even more to this game than has already been discovered. And even though speculation has slowed down a bit as the puzzles and theories become more esoteric and conspiracy-brained, I'm absolutely glued to this little drama created by the devious mind of a single talented person. Indie games are a lot of things. Daring, experimental, nostalgic, niche, approachable, trend-setting, and more. To me, they represent the opposite end of the business that is video games. When the AAA game developers got too big to be as careless and as experimental as they once were, as the industry was in its infancy, the indie game developers started coming out of the woodwork and filling that void with smash hits that likely never would have seen the light of day in a 1,000-employee, corporate-driven environment. These people are driven to create experiences that they want to see in the world, and choose to share them with us. Sure, money is always a concern, but I believe that most of these indies, whether or not they're successful, are here for the passion. The passion to create something novel and weird and subversive in the same way that many of the games that people like me who are in their 30s grew up on. The passion to support oneself through other means while working on a dream project that may never make a single penny. The passion to see your ideas come to life and share them with the world. That's what indie games are to me. And to me, Animal Well is a perfect encapsulation of what makes indie games so great. Animal Well is a brilliant game at the surface, but just like any well, it's much deeper than it looks. I keep coming back to the obscure puzzles that I was only able to completely solve because of other brilliant members of the Animal Well Discord server. These puzzles were at a level that, to a vast majority of people who will pick up this game, they may never even realize that this was a puzzle or that these puzzles even exist. Isn't that wild? To deliberately put countless hours into secrets and features that may never be seen by the eyes of another human being, all because that was the kind of game that you wanted to make. It's so good. Maybe even inspiring? I don't know. Anyway, I better end this video before I say too much more. While my beautiful patrons scroll across the screen, I want to reiterate that if you have even a passing interest in this game, to not watch or read anything else about it until you've had a chance to play it yourself. I think games are meant to be discovered firsthand, and to experience Animal Well any other way would be robbing you of that feeling. It's in the same realm as Outer Wilds and Tunic and The Witness, as a kind of game that you can only really experience once. Sure, you can play it again, but it just won't be the same. So if you liked any of those, I think you owe it to yourself to give Animal Well a shot. Also, please no spoilers in the comment section, thank you. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.